This is Simon. Simon's the CEO of Extrinsica, and he'll be talking about his journey from airforce to entrepreneur. But I will let you say that bit, Simon. I'll put myself on mute and I'll let you go for it. Okay.
Yeah, cool. Well, the session I wanted to run today is I just want to use the PowerPoint part of it just to kind of contextualize some stuff and maybe get some key messages across, I guess. What I definitely don't want it to be is death by PowerPoint, and I think probably the most valuable part of something like this is actually the interactive bit where we can get to conversations and talk about stuff that's relevant to you, because that's the point of today, really. Really what I'm going to do is just run through sort of quite briefly my journey, if you like, from being an Air Force dude into becoming an entrepreneur, where we're at today. And then there's a second bit, which is a little bit shorter, which is, what have I learned along the way that I could convey to you, and maybe gives us a basis for, having a conversation afterwards. So with no further ado, my military background, what did that look like? So you can probably tell that I am old enough to have actually been doing this stuff during the Cold War. Started off life as a ground-based air defense radar controller, so controlling fighter aircraft to go and intercept what were then Soviet reconnaissance aircraft coming around the North Cape of Norway. Did that for about 4 years. Then they sent me off to occupied West Berlin. So I spent 2 tours of duty out there, 5 years in an intelligence job, which was fascinating. Then I came back to the UK, posted back to the UK and went flying. Managed to find a picture of myself inside an airplane, which is, remarkable, actually, that such a thing exists. But really enjoyed flying, got promoted, ended up sitting behind a desk. Went to staff college, which is quite an important thing for officers in the military to do. Got to the end of that, and actually in a fit of pique kind of went, right, I'm leaving, goodbye. So really I found myself facing the next challenge, really, having made that reasonably impetuous decision to kind of say, I'm done with the military, I'm out of here, goodbye. It's like, okay, well, what do I do next? And I think for me, as with most people, I would have thought there was quite a bit of uncertainty and a degree of anxiety about taking the plunge. For me, being from a military background, my specialization, what I'd spent 20 years learning, was air battle management. So, I was sort of hopelessly ill-equipped, really, to go and enter the, the business kind of environment. So I decided that probably doing an MBA would be a good thing to do. And I spent the 2 years before actually leaving, doing an MBA. Actually did my finals after I left. So found myself in that position of leaving the Air Force, buying a new house, and doing an MBA, or at least trying to finish off an MBA and getting a new job. So it was a fairly stressful time. I did get a new job with quite a large consultancy, and I think I probably concluded inside about 2 weeks, really, that I absolutely hated my civilian existence, and I just needed an escape plan, really. So what I actually did was to make that big decision to kind of leave the safety of the herd, really, and the first, or at least my second transition that I then needed to make was from employee to employer. Like everybody, I guess, in terms of starting a business up, inevitably, whatever you start with, it starts with you. I started an interim staff company because the consultancy I joined was the only thing from a business point of view that really I knew. And so what I did was the classic step of, I'm a consultant, I'll set up a company, it'll be just me. But rather than kind of embracing the consultant lifestyle and sort of saying, well, this is actually quite a pleasant lifestyle, it's, reasonably good salary, I really wanted to actually employ people because I thought that would bring more value. So what I did was myself and my family did actually live like monks, really, for probably the first year of doing that. And then I recruited my first employee. So it's a big step. It's a step that people always get very concerned about doing. But provided you recruit the right sort of employee, and we'll come to that sort of towards the end, what I realized was just how much they contributed to increasing the revenue. And then actually went out and recruited a second employee, and the revenue went up again, and a third, and very quickly actually, and I would have said probably within the space of 6 to 9 months, it made a transformational difference to the business. But I appreciate that, taking that first big step of employing someone is an enormous step. But in our case, it was definitely worth taking. So we got the business to about 14 employees. We created a fairly profitable lifestyle business, but undeniably in a saturated market. So, then comes well, what do we do now? Do we try and grow it? Do we stick with this, grow it a bit, or do we do something different? And I think this is the kind of point that determines what sort of an entrepreneur you are. So what's your appetite for risk, really, is what it boils down to. So kind of the sort of person I am, it was a no-brainer that what we really needed to do was we needed to diversify, and we needed to try and create a new company. And I had to persuade the other two shareholders in that business to forego any surpluses that they were enjoying from the company. And I wasn't able to give them a forecast of when the new venture would make a return. So it's to their enormous credit that they had enough trust to say, yeah, let's go for it. You've made a persuasive case. We need to do it. So two of us actually founded Extrinsica Global. We both worked from home at the beginning, but in effect, what we were doing was creating a new company with a brand new product in a brand new market. In fact, in a market that barely existed at all at that stage. So it was hugely risky. I know all of you, if you've already embarked on entrepreneurship, you have to wear lots and lots of hats to begin with when you're starting the company up, and it is incredibly hard work. We spent probably around about £1.6 million of our own money developing the business over that first 6 years, and we got to a point where we definitely understood how to actually run that business, but we also understood that we needed to adapt, because the one key thing I've learned, and we can talk about this in a wee while, is that markets adapt, markets change, and you need to adapt as the markets change. So we knew we needed to adapt, and at this point, really, we were at the stage where we were needing to make what I call the fourth transition, which is sharing our business with investors, which is the next big step that any entrepreneur is going to take. And as I said, we pioneered, what was then the unheard of cloud solution services we definitely built expertise and experience, as I've said here, in the trenches. You know, we'd really done it for real, made some mistakes, learned from them, got better. We knew exactly what we needed to do to adapt, but we couldn't possibly afford it, because the hyperscale cloud environments like Azure and AWS and GCP were not mature enough for us to be able to use at the time. And what we knew we needed to do was to build our own cloud infrastructure. But that was probably going to cost about $3.5 million in terms of equipment to do that. So we decided it was time to engage with investors. Now, the one thing I'd say about that is don't underestimate how hard it is to actually find the right investors. It's really difficult. And I remember walking down Moorgate in London on, I think it was the 2nd or the 3rd of January in 2012, in the sleet, sort of repeating the mantra, I'm going to find an investor. But in truth, I didn't really know where to start. So what we did was we got a bit of luck, as inevitably happens. You know, it doesn't matter what that was, but I ended up running into some quite good angel investors. One of which was a 1980s rock star, strangely enough, who actually kind of said, yeah, I love what you're doing, and I'm in. And that, you know, really made the difference. And the other thing that I did was I very cheekily went and asked some really big organizations whether they could give us some assistance to get going. And surprisingly, they were very happy to do that. And so we ended up building our own cloud infrastructure. So, you know, that really made the transformational difference. It got us that angel investment was somewhere in the region of about £800,000. But it got us moving from sort of 4 people to immediately becoming about 10 people. And that made a huge difference in terms of the things that we could undertake, the sales capacity that we had, and so on. So I was saying to Laura earlier on, I don't consider myself to be a successful entrepreneur. I just I see myself as someone who's an entrepreneur who's very much still on the journey. And I think the point that we've arrived at is to say we've established base camp, really. So we've got beautiful new building in Oxford Science Park now. We've got, you know, really kind of state-of-the-art office space. We've grown to 30 people. We became Microsoft's first partner globally to become pure Azure. So we ditched our own cloud infrastructure and just used Azure. Even though we're still relatively small, we are probably, well, we know actually that we are one of the most capable of Microsoft's top 60 Azure partners in the UK. And we know now, we can say with considerable certainty that we've demonstrated product market fit. Enterprise customers are now buying what we offer, and we've gained significant traction in the marketplace. We're generating continuous high year-on-year growth of recurring revenues. And that's the other feature of our business model. 85% of our turnover is recurring revenue. So in the times we're in at the moment, we find ourselves in quite a good place. We're now ready, and this is the reason I've said that we've established Basecamp, is that we're now ready for transformational growth in an emerging market, and a rapidly emerging market as well. We're now engaged with private equity, and we have an extremely well thought through plan to quadruple the headcount of the business to about 120 people, and actually increase turnover by an order of magnitude over the next 5 years. which is all, eminently doable. So that's kind of where Extrinsica Global is. As I say, I utterly do not kind of go, I'm certainly not sitting here today kind of going, oh yeah, we've made it, we've done it. We're very much still on the journey, but what we have done is we've seen out that first 10 years, in fact, slightly beyond now, and we have got ourselves to a point where private equity are, really very, very interested indeed in actually investing, because they can see the growth opportunity. So that's kind of my journey. Hopefully it hasn't been too tedious and boring, up to this point. But the next bit is, I guess, so what have I learned along the way that I can pass on to you guys. So I guess the headlines that I've learned is that clearly the possibilities are endless, right? But there are three headline things that I've learned, is that your focus really needs to be not on your idea necessarily and per se, and we'll cover that in a bit more detail in a minute, but it's what your objective is. What do you want to do as an entrepreneur? Why are you doing it? And select and, determine and focus on what your objective is. And then what you can do is, once you've established that, you can continuously evaluate your path, exactly as in mountaineering. You can see the top of the hill, you don't yet know precisely which path you're going to get to it, and you need to evaluate that as you go along. And the other thing I would say is, again, just like in mountaineering, is you need to stay adaptable. Adaptability, agility to adapt is, for me and in my experience, is probably the single most important thing that you will need to do. So let's just jump into some of the things then. So the big idea, certainly what I have seen during my time doing the journey, is that people will latch on to an idea which they think is a great idea. I should be saying at this juncture, your big idea really ought to be revolving around something that you have a degree of expertise in. So I remember talking to two friends, really great friends. They both, one came from the army, the other one came from the private security industry, and they came to speak to me about starting a company up, and said, well, we both live in Herefordshire, and we thought actually we could create a company that does kind of boxed veg and this sort of stuff. And I said, what do you know about growing veg or distribution systems? And they said, well, nothing. And I said, look, my advice to you would be, do something that you know, which is security. And actually, they went off and they founded what is now I think it's the second biggest maritime security company in the world. Because what they did was they focused on something that they had a degree of expertise in. So the second piece is there a market for it? And I think this is something which it sounds obvious, but it's often overlooked. If there's not a market for the thing that you think is a great idea, it's not going to go anywhere. And related to that is this idea of not having a fixed mindset. I've seen a lot of people, a huge number of people, who kind of go, no, this is my idea, and this idea is really the idea. And certainly you need to have belief and commitment. There's no doubt about that. But the key thing I would say is evaluate the evidence, right? If you find that people are not buying what you're selling, or you're having to go to enormous lengths to persuade them to buy what you're selling, then it might be worth reevaluating the idea. But don't keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome, because it won't happen. And therefore, from my point of view, the key message out of this lot that I would give you is adapt, adapt, adapt. And I remember in the early days of Extrinsica Global, we were, I think, probably naive enough to actually retain a business consultancy to kind of tell us, how we should succeed with the business. And actually their advice to us was, you got to stop adapting. You got to stop developing your product. You've kind of made your product. Stop. Just sell what you have. And actually, if we listened to that advice, we would have disappeared, without a trace, really. And the reason that we've been successful up to this point is precisely because we have continuously adapted as the market has changed. Other players have entered the market. Organizations that are big enough to shape the market have entered the market. You have to continuously adapt. And I think from my point of view, the last three things are that I think you have to be brave. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, I think you do have to embrace risk. You can't avoid it. You have to take risks if you're going to progress. The other thing that I think you need to be is determined and dogged, and yet at the same time be innovative. So the two things are not mutually exclusive. So I've seen people be very dogged with their idea, which I mentioned a moment ago, and to simply be dogged is not enough. You do need determination, you do need doggedness, but you do need to be innovative at the same time. And combining those things is quite a trick. And then finally, the other thing that I've learned along the way is that there are moments where you will definitely feel very, very lonely indeed. And you need to be prepared for that. It is the downside of being an entrepreneur. And I found that if you can find someone that you can kind of simply talk things over with them, you're not necessarily seeking their advice, their opinion, or anything else, but just the ability to articulate something out loud means that you've shared a problem, and a problem shared is a problem halved, has been my experience. So those are the key learnings that I've had over the period. The next bit, there are two other bits. My top tips for starting up. The fundamentals. I've covered this. I've kind of emphasized this quite a bit, but don't be precious or rigid with your idea. The acid test for your idea very definitely is, will potential customers want it? And more importantly, will they want it enough to pay for it? And for me, that is the acid test around your idea. As I said in the earlier slide, don't ignore the empirical evidence. If the evidence is that people are not that keen on it, or they're definitely not prepared to pay for it, then the idea needs rethinking. Not throwing out entirely, maybe just modifying, but it does need to be reconsidered. The other thing, which is kind of stating the obvious really, but it is so true, that cash is king. Profit is important. Making a profit eventually is important, but the thing that you run your business with is cash. And the thing to do is to not underestimate how long it can take to organize additional cash. And there are so many businesses, realize at the last moment that they're about to run out of cash, and then they just don't give themselves enough time to organize that additional cash, and then boom, you hit the buffers. I also found that it does take quite a long time. So, we've been doing this now for It'll be 13 years this year. And we still haven't got all of our processes, all of our documentation sorted. It does take a really long time, and I wouldn't get demoralized about, not having that stuff in place. While your business is small, it's common sense doing this stuff. And then finally, my experience of doing all of this is that your first employees, if you do what I did and start a business, which is you to begin with, your first employee should generate revenue profitably immediately. So there are lots of, there will be lots and lots and lots of companies out there that will say, oh, you need to do marketing and you need to do this and you need to do that. You can do most of that yourself because generally speaking, it's common sense. But if you saddle yourself with someone who is a cost center, not a deliverer of revenue, then you're really, really hamstringing your business. So, it's maybe someone who can do sales, but they can do sales well enough to bring in enough revenue to cover their cost and make a contribution to the business. It may be, if you're doing consultancy, another consultant who can immediately start generating revenue. But all of the stuff that doesn't generate revenue, if you can possibly avoid recruiting those sorts of people until the business can actually afford it, then I would recommend you do. And then the final bit that I just wanted to cover was the whole business of getting investors on board. So I've now kind of been through a number of investment rounds and a number of engagements with probably all three what I would call levels of investors. So let's just take a quick look at what's involved with the kind of whole investor piece of the journey. Now I know that you guys have had a session earlier in the week on investment, from people within the industry. So I'm not trying to gainsay anything that they've said. I just want to present a perspective from an entrepreneur's point of view of dealing with the investment industry. So fundamentally, there are three types of investor. There's angel investors, venture capitalists or VCs, and there's private equity. There is a bit beyond that, which is called corporate finance, but it's not really relevant to the entrepreneur's journey at the moment. These three categories are interested in different parts of the journey, and they have different risk appetites. So clearly, angel investors are investors with a reasonably, well, in fact, quite a large appetite for risk. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing angel investment, but they're interested in coming in alongside you at a very early stage in your business. Now, that doesn't mean day one. We'll cover that in a minute, necessarily, unless you've got literally a phenomenal business idea. Venture capitalists come in at the point where you need what's called seed funding. So what you've done is you've established a business, you've established a product or a service, you have either got very significant interest in the marketplace already in your product or service, or you're actually selling a product or service into a market. Venture capitalists, the really good ones, some of them will not deal with you unless you own 75% of the equity in your business. So be mindful of that, and that kind of comes to the next stage is don't give too much equity away at the start. That's for me a key piece of advice. So just moving on from venture capitalists, they're the people who do seed funding, and then private equity are really there to scale businesses up. So they are businesses like Extrinsica Global that have established a positioning in a marketplace. They've demonstrated product market fit. They've demonstrated traction in that marketplace. All the pieces are in place. All they need to do now is scale up, and they can capitalize on the position that they've achieved. So those are the kind of three levels of investor that exist. So angels have the biggest risk appetite because clearly they're investing in things that could literally fall flat. Therefore, they tend not to invest huge sums of money. They tend to invest relatively modest amounts of money. The venture capitalists are people that will invest more money, but you're probably looking at between $500,000 and 1.5 million, that sort of territory. And then when you get to private equity, generally speaking, will not invest anything less than £5 million. And they would much prefer to be starting in the territory of £7 to 10 million. So, those are the kind of financial strata in which those different organizations invest. Obviously, because of the sums of money that they're investing, they have quite different risk appetites. So venture capitalists will probably invest in 10 companies, expect 8 of them to fail, and 2 of them to rebuild the fund. So that's the basis they operate on. Private equity have a much lower risk profile. They are interested in investing things that really are, the likelihood of them being successful is very high, at least 70% high. So that's really what private equity are looking for, which is why the product market fit and the traction in the marketplace are so absolutely vital for private equity. It is easy to give too much away at the start. Angels, if anyone's watched Dragon's Den, I don't really like it, I have to say, but if you have, you can see that angels can be really quite greedy. And you might think that giving 3% of your business away to someone because they've offered to do a critical service for you that would have cost you 50,000 quid, but they'll do it for 3% of the business. If at the end of the day you end up building a business with an equity value of 100 million quid, 50,000 quid's worth of work is going to cost you 3 million quid. So you do need to think this stuff through, and the backdrop against which to calculate that or to think about that, I feel, is that it's very easy as an early stage entrepreneur to be grateful enough that someone is interested enough in your business to actually want to invest. But the way that you need to view it is that no investor will ever do somebody a favor. It will be a very cold clinical calculation about the potential of the business that you have. And actually the way to view it is that if you do have a really great business and a great business model, you are doing them a favor by giving them the opportunity to make a great return. And that is the way that you should always approach investors or approach dealing with investors. However, that said, they are hard-nosed, and what you will need to do to get any investor on board is that if it's in the angel or VC stage, it will need to be a compelling case that you make to persuade them that you can achieve product market fit. If you're already trading in a market, then you need to have demonstrable track record, to show that you actually have achieved product market fit. And the other thing that they will want to see, and will be an acid test for them, will be traction. And if you don't have significant traction, they will be very much less interested. So, I guess the point I'm making here is that investors are very, very hard-headed, calculating people, and don't get me wrong, many of them are very, very nice, and they're great to work with. They're not all the devil incarnate. But you do need to have a very cold, calculating business head on when you're dealing with them. That, I guess, would be my final message, really, in terms of what I've learned from the journey. So with that, I'm really happy, to just chat about your road ahead. Really, if anyone's got anything they want to raise at all.